So thank you for having me here. It's honor and pleasure to open the party. And as an opener, I want to start with a big question. So why do we age? As you probably all realized, we all do. Nobody understands what for. Nothing makes sense than in the light of evolution. In the light of evolution, aging, this is not a sentimental statement. So just idea that our bodies are made to replicate our genes is probably one of the few things that we are confident about biology. And this is if our model contradicts to this, then our model is wrong. This is a very powerful tool. And aging seems to contradict to this statement, because aging is very bad for reproduction. If I'm dead, then no progeny anymore. So what are the ideas that can bring the aging together with evolution? The first and a very primitive view on that was that animals just do not survive to the age of senescence. So they die before by predation, coldness, etc. However, if we look in the data, we find that this is not true. So these red lines are mortalities. So let's say the lion of the age of 14 has a higher chance to die than a lion of the age of 4, and lions survive to the age of 14 in the wild, meaning that some proportion of lions are dying of aging. So if you look into the any ecologic book, you find this diagram. This is called survivorship curves. Almost all mammals have type 1 survivorship curve that shows that aging can affect survival in the wild. So this is wrong. The next model that emerged is antagonistic pleiotropy. So this is now like a main thing. So idea is that there are genes which are good in young years and bad in old years. And because some animals still do not survive to their old years, this balance is shifted, and such genes can in some be beneficial. So this is a very important concept. It's a mainstream. So let's study it a little bit in detail. So this is a piece of this bibliaic paper published '57. So George Williams wrote what is essential for his theory to work. First, some of this is essential for reproductive success, but not part of which is passed to the either sexual or asexual reproduction. This statement is true, is wrong, because unicellular organisms do not have soma and they still age. Natural selection, we agree. Then the third point, pleiotropic genes of special sort. It's necessary to postulate genes that have opposite effects on fitness at different ages, or more accurately, in different somatic environments. Whatever. So this first postulates non-evolvable features, which is very suspicious, right? So if we look, rat, 2 years, lives for 2 years on average. At squirrel, lives 20 years on average. So are the same genes responsible for this aging in these two animals, or different genes? We all agree that same genes. So somehow, squirrel managed to uncouple the beneficial and detrimental properties of these pleiotropic genes, and it's not clear why the rat cannot do that, given that from the previous slide, selection is there. So this is the first problem. Second problem is that with this third point, he introduces biological age, somatic environment, before he introduces aging. So this is a circular argument. So there should be a timer in our bodies that this pleiotropic gene should look at and say, okay, should I play good or should I play bad? So, and it's not clear how this timer works. So to the next, what examples of pleiotropic genes Williams produces. So a hypothetical example, we might imagine a mutation arising that has a favorable effect in the calcification of the bone in the developmental period, but which expresses itself as in a subsequent somatic environments in the, older ages, in the calcification of arteries. And if the gene becomes established in the population, and if this later effect is eventually deleterious, a selective premium would be placed on any gene that might suppress this arterial calcification. And as the suppression approaches completion, however, the selection pressure for further suppression would diminish. Complete suppression would probably never be realized. So this is a very weak quantitative argument. So the selection is there. Probability to remove the trait, the detrimental trait, is there, but somehow it doesn't complete. So this idea just directly contradicts to the concept by Seymour Benzer, who published it a couple years before him, that just the unit of mutation is smaller than a gene. It is this example, surprisingly, is still cited. And regardless, let's say calcification. Okay, birds are growing very, very fast because they need it for aerodynamics. By fledging, they should be already full size. And they still live very long. No problems with arteric calcification. They also use calcification to produce eggs. So these things can clearly be uncoupled. And there is still not a single convincing example of this pleiotropic gene that evolution cannot resolve, and that can work in this rat and squirrel setting. So this is the third theory, but it's really just a modification of the second theory. So the idea of Thomas Kirkwood, 75, was that the evolution review of aging suggested mortality might be due an energy-saving strategy of reduced regulation of somatic cells. So let's say these guys, they age, but they invest more in reproduction. And they are able to produce 2 generations, while these slow agers produce only 1 generation. And with this, they can, so by the time, by the end point of this diagram, this has 3 animals, this has 4 animals. And with this, they can over-replicate the non-aging strain. This idea has 2 problems. So in case 1, most animals are, population numbers are stagnant, right? So then, to keep my representation in the genetic pool, if I age, I need to produce another individual with my genome. So, and in this case, this production of another individual should be cheaper than maintaining of my body, which somehow contradicts to the basic laws of conservation, because, okay, let's say 90% cells and proteins in my body are damaged. It is still residual 10% that I don't need to replace, this material is still much bigger than the zygote. So, and just energetically, it cannot be an energy-saving strategy. Next, if we have an exponential population growth, this is less frequent case, but it still happens. So then, indeed, these fast reproducers can overgrow the non-agers. But in this case, the environment should be abundant enough to feed this growing mass of animals. And at the same time, it should be not enough energy, not enough food for me to maintain my body. So there is a contradiction on the condition of the environment then. So both these models, so these are two species of the same model, they often called as pay later models. So like aging is something like college loan. We are so fit when we are young, and then we need to pay for it. And if we wouldn't pay, we wouldn't be as fit as we are in the young years. However, so there are 2 problems with this pay later. First problem is pay, what is the currency? Also, in addition to what I said above, caloric restriction prolonged lifespan. And if the currency would be calories, then feeding animals better would make them non-aging, right? And same is true for calcium or any other zinc or any other micro element we can imagine. So also males are aging faster than females. Males invest less in reproduction. So it's not clear what the what pay means in this case. And second, there is a huge problem with later. What does mean how time is defined? These models presume that biological age monotonously depends on time. Why should it be? Implicitly, it excludes rejuvenation. If you want to rejuvenate somebody, then you need to either change the model or close the shop. Because if we have a time machine, then loans cannot work, right? Banking cannot work because the people will travel back in time and fix their loans immediately at the time they take them. Okay, but is rejuvenation around in nature? It's not that frequent, and that's why this argument is not often brought up. But there are examples of rejuvenation. I think the last speaker will tell more about it. But most of them are found in eusocial insects. So, for example, bees, they have like foragers that live very short and nurses that live longer. This is still same genomes. They can produce different lifespans, and queens are living very, very long. But we are now speaking about workers. So if it is born as a young bee, then it works as a nurse. And if it stays as a nurse, then it lives long. But if it goes to foraging job, then life is shortened very fast. However, if you take a hive, discard all the nurses, then some foragers must go back and take nursing jobs, and then they rejuvenate. Next example is this in ants. So also, in response to disaster, if the queen dies, then some of the workers become pseudo-queens. They are less productive than real queens, but they still can produce eggs, and they live like 4 or 5 times longer. So, paradoxically, and I want to say that in eusocial insects, these workers are somatic tissues, so they don't typically reproduce themselves in this meta-organism. So, if the worker dies, then the hive should replace them with a different worker. And it would be comparable that we, instead of regenerating hand, we drop it off and regrow it. And this should be energetically beneficial, very questionable. So it seems to be that rejuvenation is possible. Classic models predicted to happen every time as an individual approaches an old age, but it somehow doesn't happen. And as you can see, here rejuvenation happens in response to emergency. So like if the choice is rejuvenation or death, then okay, rejuvenation. But it seemed to be that it should come with some very bad consequences, ecologic ones. So pay later is a problem in both words. There are also models that say that aging is because of cancer, protein aggregation, other mechanistic reasons. So these models are strictly not evolutionary models. They answer a different question. They don't answer of why we age. They answer more what happens when we age. What are the mechanisms? So all of them, if you try to challenge them with our rat and squirrel test, they fail. So let's say if we say aging happens because of cancer. So rat ages because of cancer, but squirrel ages 20 years later. So somehow it managed to. And the same is true for every point in this list. So and every model that includes names of proteins, cells, organs, some mechanistic details, and doesn't include the idea of a trade-off is wrong. because just try to challenge it with this red squirrel test. So this shouldn't be here. So these are just side effects of the these projects of mapping all the proteins in the human body, and this is just cognitive artifacts. So the question: can aging be programmed and adaptive? That's, I think, what David is interested mostly. So the traditional answer is no, very, very no. And the first argument against adaptive aging is Hamilton's rule. Hamilton's rule describes situations when altruism can evolve. So as an altruist, I want to help my kin. So in this equation, C stays for the cost for me, B for the benefit for the recipient and for altruism, and R is relatedness between us. So if I give an ice cream to my twin brother, then I'm in 0. If I give an ice cream to my brother, 50%, 0.5 relatedness, then I lose 50% of fitness. So altruism can evolve only if I have 10 ice creams, they are melting, they really cost nothing for me, and then I give them to all my relatives. This, how it can happen. However, if aging is an altruism, its cost is my entire life. So I need to give my relatives something which is more valuable than my life. How is it possible? Doesn't seem to be possible. Second problem is that we can see phenotypes that can be considered gain of function phenotypes, but we never see loss of function phenotypes. We can treat Drosophila flies with mutagens, and we will see eyeless, wingless mutants, but we never saw an ageless mutant, meaning that the aging is more important than vision. If aging would be programmed, there would be some genes there. And by destroying these genes, we must find a non-aging mutant. Never happened. So, so as you might see, non-evolvable features are repeated twice in this slide. So here, and there is a big difference between two arguments. So this is fine. This is a killer argument that makes any model of this type impossible. But still, if you look at these two halves, problems are on both sides. So, and unfortunately, people who developed these models somehow managed to convince everybody that the problem is resolved. Well, these two models have fundamental trenches, but somehow community managed to ignore them. And a handful of people are working on evolution. I'm very happy to say that David James, who is also a third speaker today, he is also working on evolution of aging. He's trying to fix the mainstream. And I really looking forward for his talk. But today, my talk is about the right side. So there are a handful of people, very little amount, that are considered freaks. So Goldschmidt, Mitteldorf, and your humble servant, who think that aging is an adaptation. So the Goldschmidt's model is acceleration of evolution model. So the idea is that if the generations are shorter, then we evolve faster. And fast evolving variants can over-evolve the slow evolving variant. This model has problems because only a few animals, like about 20%, are dying of aging in the wild. Then by acceleration of these generations, we do not increase diversity. We reduce diversity. And what we increase is fixation of the trait. And species in the wild are exposed to multiple factors. And if the factor, so a good selection factor will kill everyone who doesn't fit, and that's fine. Why do we want to empower a weak selection factor? Because on the next round, it might be not that important. Something else would be important, and we will lose diversity empowering the weak one. Also, living fossils have short lifespans. Sharks are not super long-lived, and these trilobite tadpole shrimps are also not very long-lived. So, importantly, Goldschmidt doesn't have a mathematical model one can challenge. So, Josh Mitteldorf, who gave a talk last conference, has a model, and David asked me to discuss it. I also don't believe it. So frankly speaking, so idea is that we compete aging and non-aging variants. So here, if we mix aging and non-aging in one compartment, non-aging always wins. Lives longer, replicates better, displaces everyone. So Josh's model requires their separation into two compartments. If one animal from here gets here, then they take over. But Josh's model implies some overpopulation-based extinction, some bands here. Everybody should die down to zero. And then this compartment can be recolonized by aging strain. And in the end, we have both compartments populated with aging. So what are the problems here? So this is group selection, which people don't believe work very well. But there is also a specific problem for this model. So there is density-dependent dispersal. As you might know, if there is like low resources, then animals are like overpopulation, low resources, animals are trying to find a better place. If this channel exists, right, so they are somehow connected, then these guys will go here in search for better life. And it will end up with the domination of non-aging strain. Density-dependent dispersal is the first problem. Extinction scenario is questionable. Also, the killing everyone by overpopulation to the very last animal. I don't know a realistic example how it can happen. Typically, Lotka Valterra, the population oscillate. And also, population control, if it's so important, can happen on the birth rate level. And these examples of the control on the birth level examples are very numerous. So with all the respect to Josh, I don't believe his model. So, and now we are coming to our idea. So we believe that aging evolved as a basic immune adaptation. So we believe aging is adaptive suicide. Question: can suicide is good for something? Of course, evolutionary. Psychologically, it's very bad, very bad. So of course, ecologically, it's also very bad because there is no progeny anymore. However, question: if the individual is already sterile, then suicide is neutral because no progeny anyway, that way or that way. Now, let's say an individual is sterile and infected with some bad disease, it can transmit to its kin, which is already delivered. Then, so no progeny anyway, and it can reduce fitness of its skin by infection. Then suicide is beneficial, right? So you now say too many components, sterilization, pathogens. Yeah, we are speaking about sterilizing pathogens. Such pathogens are around and very numerous. So other well-accepted examples of adaptive suicide in response to pathogens. Yes, there are, for example, bacteria. If it is infected with a phage, it will produce many phages. It is committed to death because bacteria are very bad in clearing phages, and it will infect all its neighbors that are probably the relatives. And bacteria evolved ABI system, abortive infection system, that kill the host in response to phage, but the phage wouldn't be able to propagate. So, but we metazoans don't do that. So, at least in response to infections, we don't kill ourselves. Question: but can aging be something like that? And the answer is yes. So again, on the group level, on the level of population, if the disease is with low transmission and is chronic, if it doesn't shorten lifespan by itself, then it can, for example, HIV, right? HIV, one patient on average transmit to 1 or 2 patients. So if the lifespan would be shorter, then this number will be less than 1, R0 will be less than 1, and epidemics wouldn't be able to progress. So in here you see a simulation. So like short-lived do not have infections, long-lived a lot of infections. Infections are black. So, but again, as in case of Joshua's model, this is a population level benefit. If we, let's say, if we mix long livers and short livers in this stochastic modeling, then long livers will always win. It will be bad for population, but for altruist will be extinct by the time someone can realize it. So, but this is we believe that this is an artifact of the fact that that these populations are modeled as animals behave like molecules of gas. They can interact all together promiscuously. So we developed models that account for viscosity and limitations of density. So in here, so on the right, you see the wolf tract in Minnesota. And here are our viscous population modeling, where individuals are rejecting each other. So if they meet together, they try to stay away in order to maximize their territories. And territories means resources. Bigger the territory is, better reproduction is. And if they are infected by pathogens, they are sterilized. And how it works in practice. So again, if the individuals are short-lived, infection is much less than if they are long-lived, as shown before. If we mix together long life and short life in the absence of infection, long life always win. However, if we put long life and short life in the presence of infection, then short life wins. So what happens? So infection is not very prevalent in this short life variant. But in long life variant, it takes goes almost to 100%, sterilizes everybody, induces a local demographic depression, and leads to the extinction of the long-lived strain. This is a very unusual type of selection because the same trait, the long life, in the beginning of the scenario is adaptive before the pathogen jumped in the population, and then become detrimental. After the pathogen is encountered, it is a detrimental trait. So with this, we resolve the first problem that we discussed above, so the Hamilton's rule. So first of all, since the individual is already sterilized, might be sterilized by infection, the cost of his residual lifespan is low. And second, by killing self, being infected, it might help multiple of his relatives. So, and this inequation then can stand. Second, what about the non-aging mutants? So the answer to this question goes to, again, to this very unusual type of selection. So let's assume we have two types of short-lived hosts. In this case, yellow and brown have exactly the same lifespan. But brown can induce, in one mutation, can bring it to long lifespan. And let's then see how this scenario runs. First, it induces this long lever, then long lever take over for a time, and then get displaced by infections, right? So by the end of simulation, no brown dots are here. So it seemed to be that in this scenario, not only the long life by itself, but even the ability to produce a long-lived mutant can be a detrimental trait. Production of this mutant in one mutation can be a big problem. Now, how evolution can resolve this problem? It can put it under multiple control. Like now we need to mutagenize 2 genes to produce these long levers. And having 2 genes simultaneously is a big problem. So it's rare. So, but then there will be probably these intermediate forms that have only 1 mutation. And these can accumulate in population and produce back the long livers. And this is a problem. So that's why evolution wants to attenuate these intermediates, that they do not accumulate if they are produced. And how to do that? One can connect this intermediate mutation with some viable function. And then it will be a phenotype which is indistinguishable from the pleiotropic genes that were shown before. And I believe that most of the observations that people make and thinking this is a pleiotropic gene that we found, we mutagenized something, we extended lifespan, but fitness got reduced. We think that this is exactly because of this evolvability constraints. But unlike antagonistic pleiotropy proposes that they just happen, these linkages just happen by chance. We believe these linkages are adaptive. So the evolution of these evolvability suppressors, it's a very marginal topic in evolutionary biology. Only 1 paper was published on that in a small journal, unfortunately. So first conclusion. We showed that aging might have evolved as a primitive immune adaptation that restricts propagation of infectious diseases. And model can resolve traditional arguments raised against adaptive aging hypothesis. And we don't need waivers from like general laws of conservation. We don't include this non-Euclidean genetics as antagonistic pleiotropy. To me, this is the most parsimonious idea that is on the table for now. Now, coming back to the question, why don't we kill ourselves like bacteria? Because it also seemed to be a nice strategy. So we think that the answer is that we have evolved very nice immune system that can clear almost everything from, almost every pathogen from our populations. So in the next simulation, we have studied coexistence of these incurable pathogens, that sterilizing and chronic, and curable pathogens that are like HIV. Evolutionary HIV is a good reason to commit suicide, and flu. It would be very pity if we would commit suicide in response to flu, because it will be gone by itself in 2 weeks, right? So we have modeled epidemiological situation, and both types of pathogens are around. So black rings are chronic pathogens, red rings are curable pathogens. Okay, and now we have also 2 types of strains. This is a regular strain, which doesn't do anything with suicide, and this is a phenoptotic strain that commits suicide in response to every infection. This is a harakiri knife. So what happens if we have prevalence of chronic infections? Then indeed this harakiri strain is winning, because it again, if the individual is infected with the chronic disease which sterilizes it, it's better to kill itself. in viscous population. However, so this is like sensitivity analysis. In this diagram, there are transmission rates of curable and chronic pathogens. So in this corner, we have more curable infections. In this corner, we have more chronic infections. So this situation corresponds to the bacteria situation. And here, phenoptosis wins. This situation, we believe, corresponds to our situation. Here, phenoptosis loses, because this curable infection makes the false positive signals that mock the immune system. The immune system probably cannot recognize what is the pathogen, Google it, and figure out the diagnosis. It says, okay, here is a new antigen. And is it HIV or flu? It's not clear. So, and we are probably in here. And also in this model, we can rationalize our results from before. So like probability of being infected with the chronic disease just linearly grows with age. And after a certain age, it's probably better to, for an organism to kill itself just prophylactically, just because the statistics says him that probably you are infected. Sorry. And we can do it, find it mathematically. Of course, curable infections do not affect anything. And the chronic infections do affect it. So only infections as before, only infections with like low transmission rate, R0 around 1 or 2 are important, because if everybody gives, if everybody gets an infection like early age, like CMV, then aging will not help, right? So if everyone is infected in childhood by chronic disease, then before puberty, then aging will not help that. No, and of course, if the transmission is too low, then aging cannot evolve because the selection pressure is too low. But in this sweet spot of these slow pathogens, aging should evolve. Now question, okay, if aging is an immune adaptation, it should cross-talk with the immune system. So we cannot trust the immune system on the recognition of a pathogen based on its antigenic structure, but can we trust immune system based on some epidemiological properties of pathogens? And we found such situations. So for example, like if you think about curable diseases, most of them attack children, right? Like polio, measles, these guys, they mostly infect people in young years and then produce lifetime immunity. And that's what we can find in our model. Compared to that, chronic diseases are more distributed across all the ages. So if the first pathogen encounter occurs later in age, with higher probability, it will be this chronic disease that deserves suicide. And with lower probability, it will be acute. So it might be that at later ages, we need to involve phenoptosis. And we can find it in our models. So indeed, in this corner where bacteria are residing, every pathogen is chronic. This age of optimal suicide is 0. It's like in previous model, whatever, at any age what I meet, I kill myself. But in this corner with the curable pathogen prevalence, this age shifts towards later ages. And this, in our opinion, this is evolutionary explanation of immunosenescence. You know, in SARS-CoV-2 pandemics, older people were suffering more. And that's why. So, yeah, we did a little bit of experiments here. We took old flies, Drosophila, young flies. We infected them with viruses. So the two potential outcomes are if the if these entropic models are correct, then immune system declines and virus should be happier in the older individual. But for example, in case of this virus, the load was same between young and old, but the old flies were dying much faster. Meaning that, of course, it's bad for a host, but it's also bad for a virus because it has less time to transmit. And some amount of the virus is lower in old if we integrate over time. With another virus, we tried the older individuals were actually producing less virus, and death was at the same rate, also producing less virus in total. So with the third virus, we haven't seen any difference. So the difference was there, but it wasn't statistically significant. So it seems to be that the idea that with aging, immune system becomes less protective might be not right. It is more protective, but it protects the kin and not the organism itself. So that's the model so far. And yet another point. So another epidemiological property that can help the immune system to discriminate between chronic and curable is length of the disease. So if I'm sick for 10 years, then it's probably something chronic. And it's a good idea to commit suicide. So, and we tried if immune system can inform our suicidal strategy and accelerate aging in response to infection. So like if we, so in here, like if the curable disease hit the individual, then the lifespan will be shortened very insignificantly. But if the disease is chronic, then lifespan shortening is dramatic. And this is a basis of this sensing and discrimination between chronic and curable. So, and we run the simulation, and indeed, in here, in this corner where the bacteria are residing, every pathogen is chronic. Super fast acceleration is adaptive, so it is equivalent to phenoptosis. So in this corner where we are, like 2 to 4 times of acceleration is fixed. So meaning that chronic infections should accelerate aging. We tried it in flies again, so we used replicons. These are genetic tools to mimic infection in animals. And we can see that these chronically infected flies are dying faster. But is it, again, a glass problem, or is it real aging? So to test that, we made transcriptomic clocks by collecting wild-type flies at different ages, build transcriptomic profiles, put our samples here, and we see that, so this is control, and this is chronic infected, that they are indeed older by their transcriptomic profiles. So, and this is not entirely new, because in principle, this is known that people who live with HIV, even if they are on the therapy, they are like 5 years older by their biochemistry, methylation clocks. So, and also it is a screenable phenotype. We can take these flies and try mutations on them, and we found that, so this is still sort of ongoing, but we found that P53, if we inactivate it, it can rescue the phenotype. So the infection is still there, but some signaling is disrupted, and the acceleration of aging doesn't happen. Meaning that, so some like traditional gerontologists must say, okay, aging is about damage, infection puts on top of this damage, and then that's why you see acceleration. But it seems to be that this is not about damage, it's about signaling. So, final conclusion, we can rationalize crosstalk between immunity and aging. Immunosenescence and acceleration of aging by infection might be adaptive. So, and infection mimetic accelerates aging in P53-dependent manner. And it suggests involvement of cellular senescence. So this is a take-home message.